Hey, and welcome to The Explainer. In the world of global aid, there's this one word you hear everywhere: localization. It's often sold as this simple, elegant fix for a system that many feel is broken. But is it really that simple? Well, that's what we're going to dig into.
Okay, so think about this for a second. What if the best people to respond to a crisis weren't the ones flying in from halfway across the world, but the people who actually live there? That idea, that fundamental shift in thinking, is at the very heart of everything we're talking about today. So what does localization even mean, really? Well, at its core, it's about shifting power and resources. It's basically about flipping the script. Instead of big international groups calling all the shots, it's about putting local communities and organizations right in the driver's seat. All right, here's our game plan for today. First up, we'll unpack the big promise of localization. Like, why is it such a big deal right now? Then we'll see how this one idea shows up in 3 different arenas. After that, we'll get into the 4 major challenges that make this so darn hard to do. And finally, we'll look past the buzzword to figure out what really matters. Okay, so section 1, the localization promise. Why is everyone talking about this right now? Well, this whole movement didn't just pop up overnight. It really grew out of some major problems people saw with the old way of doing things. You know, for years, the big critique has been that the whole international aid system is super top-down, mostly run by organizations from the global north. And frankly, it can be slow, caught up in red tape, and afraid to take risks. Most importantly, it has this tendency to completely ignore the incredible knowledge that local people have, and it often fails to give them any real ownership of projects in their own backyard. This all kind of came to a boil at the 2016 World Humanitarian Summit, which really thrust localization into the global spotlight. Now, localization isn't just one single thing. To really get it, you've got to see how it plays out in 3 different but connected areas. People call this the triple nexus. You've got your immediate humanitarian aid, your long-term development work, and then the really tricky business of peace building. And this table here really breaks it down nicely. In the humanitarian world, it's all about being faster and more effective by tapping into local knowledge during a crisis. For development, it's about pushing back against those huge, top-down plans and focusing on local ownership instead. And in peace building, it's a move away from international-led efforts to really supporting peace work that starts from the ground up. 3 different fields, but one common goal: give power to local actors. But you know, the debate gets the loudest, the most heated, in the humanitarian field. That's where lives are on the line, and every decision matters. It's where both the promise and the problems of localization become incredibly clear. And that brings us to this number, 25%. This became the rallying cry. At that World Humanitarian Summit, all the big players got together and signed something called the Grand Bargain. And they set this massive, ambitious goal to get 25% of all humanitarian money directly into the hands of local groups by the year 2020. A huge target. But yeah, right away, people started pumping the brakes. Just listen to this quote from Sarah Pantiliano of the Humanitarian Policy Group. The concern was basically that it was too much too fast, that a lot of local groups just didn't have the accounting systems or the bureaucracy in place to handle that kind of cash all at once. And look, this isn't just a humanitarian aid problem. It's the same story in development and peace building. Over on the development side, take post-war Iraq. International planners built all these rural clinics, even though Iraqis were saying loud and clear they needed hospitals. The result? Projects that nobody used. And then in peace building, it's a similar deal. Top-down approaches often push aside the very people who need to be involved, which has led to calls for bottom-up solutions that respect local ways of doing things, like tribal governance in Yemen. Okay, so if this idea sounds so great on paper, why hasn't it just worked? Why isn't it the default everywhere? Well, it's because this supposedly simple idea is actually incredibly tricky to pull off. Let's get into the 4 biggest challenges. So here they are. First, just defining who counts as local. Second, this whole debate around capacity. Third, keeping the political will alive. And fourth, figuring out how all the different levels, local, national, global, can actually work together. All right, let's dive into that first one, which you'd think would be easy. Who is really local? Turns out this is one of the thorniest questions in the whole discussion. Man, this is where it gets messy. The line between local and international just blurs into nothing almost immediately. Think about it. Is an NGO based in the capital city really local to a small rural village? What about a group led by people from the diaspora who live in another country? Or what about UN staff who are hired from the country they work in, but are still part of the big international system? It gets really complicated. And the label often has more to do with politics than anything else. Okay, challenge number 2, this really thorny debate about capacity. So on one side of the argument, you have people saying local groups are always the first to respond. They know the culture, the language, the geography, and they say the talk of a capacity gap is just an excuse for international groups to hold on to power. But then you have the other side of the coin. The whole definition of a disaster is something that overwhelms local ability to cope. Plus, you get this weird paradox where a flood of international aid can actually hurt local capacity, like when highly skilled local engineers get hired to just be drivers for foreign staff. And that leads us to challenge number 3, which is all about politics. For localization to actually work, everybody has to be on board, from international donors all the way down to national governments. And let me tell you, that political will is super fragile. First, on the international side, you've got donors who have to make this huge mental leap to actually give up some control and accept more risk. That's a big ask. Then you've got national governments that are sometimes pretty nervous about giving too much power to community groups they don't control. And here's the real paradox. This rise in anti-globalist politics in some countries threatens the very aid budgets that localization relies on. Even worse, some regimes have figured out how to use the language of localization to funnel aid only to groups they approve of, sidelining anyone critical. And that brings us to our final challenge, and this one is maybe the most important. See, the answer isn't just to throw out global and slap local on everything. That's too simple. A really effective system has to connect all the dots, from the grassroots action at the local level to supportive policies at the national and even international levels. They all have to talk to each other. Okay, so we've been through the promise, the practice, the problems. What's the big takeaway here? How do we get beyond just treating localization as a trendy buzzword? I think this quote from Barakat and Milton really nails it. It's a reminder that we have to be really honest here. Localization isn't some magic wand we can wave. Just going local isn't an automatic guarantee that things will be better or more peaceful. We have to think critically about it. And that's the real key, right? The goal isn't just to change the mailing address of an aid office. It's about a deep, fundamental shift in the power dynamics of global aid. It's about creating a smarter system, maybe a more humble one, that actually values what local people know and lets them lead. So, in the end, it's about ditching that old-school top-down model for good. What we need is a totally integrated approach, where what's happening on the ground is connected to national policies, regional teamwork, and international support, all of it working together. Which leaves us with one final, massive question. And it's really the central puzzle of this whole thing. How does the world help local solutions grow without taking them over? That's the billion-dollar question. Thanks for tuning in.